trademark of the Roaring Twenties, the Charleston. The year, 1927. Everything jumped, from swinging beads to cloche hats. The beat, like today's rock and roll, was frantic. So were parents. Dance marathons were the craze, partners sleeping on each other's shoulder. Beginning with this glance at the flaming youth of another era, we refresh your memories of 3 decades, 30 years that changed the world. Prohibition, 7 years old in 1927. The so-called noble experiment had become a farce. Sale of liquor was prohibited, but you could buy it almost at will, if you had the price. For every raided speakeasy, 6 new ones sprang up. At first a public nuisance, prohibition became more serious. It spawned a new group of criminals, serving as a shooting gallery for racketeers. Gunmen and gangsters slipped in and out of police courts with consummate ease. Al Capone ruled Chicago. Dapper, debonair Jimmy Walker, songwriting mayor of New York, whose twinkling eyes and lilting voice typified the gay and naughty year 1927. East Side, West Side, they loved him everywhere, because in him was embodied the spirit of the times. It was the year of the big fight. Boxing fans descended on Chicago weeks in advance. Some waited outside Soldiers Field all night to buy seats a quarter-mile from ringside. Over 1 million people paid over $2.5 million to watch Tunney beat Dempsey and argue for the rest of their lives over the history-making long count. Tunney got the benefit of that disputed call as well as nearly $1 million, most of which, because of 1927 income tax rates, he kept. The baseball world of 30 years ago was cheering the greatest of them all, Babe Ruth, the unsurpassed manufacturer of home runs. In 27, he clouted 60. Others have come close to the Bambino's mark. None has reached it. And to think that he started as a pitcher.
Not too many miles from the house that Ruth built, Yankee Stadium, is Roosevelt Field, Long Island. No one cheered and only a handful were present on a murky dawn in May 1927 when a single-engine plane was wheeled to the runway. Dubbed the Spirit of St. Louis, its nose was pointed toward the Atlantic Ocean, over 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean. This was to be a solo flight to Europe, an event that began as an offbeat item in the newspapers and was to end with worldwide headlines as the achievement of the time. The lone flyer, Charles A. Lindbergh. One man, one engine, one ham sandwich. Later, electrified Parisians sweep across Le Bourget Airfield to lionize the conqueror. Three weeks later, back in New York, where the spectacular harbor reception was only a foretaste of things to come. Parade to dwarf all parades inched up teeming Broadway, where frenzied crowds and a sky alive with man-made snow created an unforgettable welcome extravaganza. Charles A. Lindbergh, the Lone Eagle, carefully prepared his flight, then dared all and won all in his moment of greatest triumph.
Same year, another flight made news, though not of the front-page variety. An airplane of cloth and wood took off from Key West, Florida for the 90-mile trip to Havana, Cuba. The Pan American flight was the first U.S. scheduled overseas passenger run ever made.
October 29th, 1929. The golden 20s end. The tarnished 30s begin. Stock market crash. The bubble of paper prosperity burst on Black Monday, as thousands who had invested with borrowed money in a gamble on rising stock prices were forced to the financial wall. The bread line became a symbol of the Great Depression that settled over the land. Another was the apple seller. The slogan, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" Political, social, and economic ferment followed the end of good times. For a generation to come, the psychological aftermath of the collapse was to shape America. In 1933, Herbert Hoover left the White House to make room for the New Deal. He joined the newly elected Franklin D. Roosevelt for the inaugural ride down Pennsylvania Avenue. Silk toppers were a must for this ceremony until 1952, when President Eisenhower wore a black Homburg. The dawn of the Roosevelt era was accompanied by the end of Prohibition, touching off wild celebrations and bringing the mixed drink, the cocktail, back into vogue. To speed its flow, beer was brought to some cities in tank cars. mandate of the electorate was achieved. One thing remained constant in a fast-changing world. These bathing suits were stylish in 1933. Don't they look like today's? Yes, one thing, and one thing only, remained constant.
Martial music, the goose step, brown shirts, and the ramrod salute of Heil Hitler. A rumble began in Middle Europe that was to make the earth tremble. Companion dictatorship in Italy. Physical strength was glorified. Mussolini loved nothing better than to display his torso. The rumble turned into a roar in 1935. Ethiopia was invaded. Aggression on the march. Explosion in Africa boomed the prelude to World War II. Ethiopia's Emperor Haile Selassie begs the League of Nations for action against the invader. But the temper of the times did not call for action. His plea ignored, the Lion of Judah walks away, alone.
In that same year, halfway across the world and outside the news spotlight, on islands with strange-sounding names like Wake and Guam, airline workers fought terrible odds to hack roads, airfields, and refueling stations out of untamed land where not even mud paths had existed before. In November, the first of the China Clippers took off from San Francisco, and the air ocean above the Pacific was at last conquered for passenger and cargo service to the Far East. The loading of mail for this pioneer flight was carried on with considerable ceremony. Postmaster General James Farley personally supervised the operation.
when the rumble grew louder. Massive build-up for World War II. But other news was made too.
Windsor Castle shakes with an assault on its ancient dignity. A king was about to give up his throne. The culmination of months of tension in England, eager curiosity throughout the earth. Bulletins from the palace, bulletins from the Prime Minister's office. The romance of the century between an American divorcee and the King of England reached a climax. All the world listened as His Majesty King Edward VIII publicly announced his abdication for the woman he loved. His brother successor became George VI. His elder daughter Elizabeth was to succeed him and become queen.
Also that year, one of the early efforts by man to conquer the stratosphere and beyond. Swiss-born Professor Auguste Piccard began a series of balloon ascensions into the unknown. Professor Piccard is also known for his explorations of the bottoms of the oceans.
Max Schmeling tuned up for the international fight of the decade by blasting golf balls. Later in the ring, he blasted Joe Louis. But it was Louis, with dynamite in both hands, who was to blast Schmeling and everyone else during the next 10 years. A horse captured the imagination of turf fans in the 30s, War Admiral. With a patented stretch run that left them gasping, he won the Kentucky Derby, went on to take racing's Triple Crown, and become one of the all-time champions of the track. Baseball enthusiasts, including New York's fiery mayor, Fiorello Little Flower LaGuardia, found a new hero in Joe DiMaggio, inheritor of Babe Ruth's ability to propel a ball hard, far, and often. In the World Series of 1939, the famous snooze play, when the Yankees were helped to the title by Ernie Lombardi's untimely doze at home plate. Evening gowns of 1939. Once more, they look almost like the latest silhouettes of today. The only constant in a fast-changing world. Hats and every other item of feminine fashions, including bathing suits, seem to appear in cycles that are forever reappearing.
President Roosevelt at Flushing Meadow, New York, to open the World's Fair, the most ambitious international event ever staged in the United States. And the entire world seemed to assemble there. Remember these pavilions, including the Trilot and Perisphere, they were the hallmark of the world of tomorrow. When feet grew tired, there were sightseeing cars touring the fairgrounds, their horns blowing to the tune of the sidewalks of New York. The great bell of St. Peter's tolled in the Vatican. A new pope was installed. Cardinal Pacelli, His Holiness Pope Pius XII, gave his first blessing to the worshippers. (1939) Ribbentrop journeys to Moscow to seal the Hitler-Stalin Pact, a treaty that freed the Führer's hand to attack Poland and the West. That same year, Winston Churchill returned to the world stage. In the years to come, he was to be one of its leading actors. The four-square walk, the hat, the usually present cigar, well known wherever men looked at pictures. His actions decisive for millions of people. The man of the century. And in the United States, the last link in the air bridge across the oceans was forged. The Yankee Clipper, first regularly scheduled transatlantic passenger flight. Destination, Lisbon, Portugal, 22 hours away. From there to Marseille, France, another 7 hours. The globe was spanned through the sky. War, World War, a many-fronted war. The battles, the suffering, the defeats, the victories still fresh in our minds. Less well known is how the international airline changed the world by experimentation and route mapping. For instance, the need for critical materials like rubber was urgent. Often it had to come from great distances, sometimes from impenetrable jungles where river landing fields were the only means of approach. This was the triumph of the overseas commercial plane as a cargo carrier, with the unique ability of taking goods from source to final destination, from origin to ultimate point of need in one swoop, eliminating awkward packing, transshipping, warehousing. For only transportation by air could cross the oceans
hop the mountains, climb over the jungles, uninterrupted. The first stop is the last stop. Changes in transportation brought on changes in diplomacy. Leaders of nations once forced to communicate with each other through time-consuming and impersonal cables and letters could now literally drop in on each other by air. Their decisions, so critical not only to the vast distant millions of people in all corners of the world, but also to you and me, were once made with a gulf of thousands of miles separating the decision makers, who, more often than not, had not even met each other. Ever since, there has been the opportunity for direct contact, acquaintance, sizing up. VJ Day, 6 years of strife ended. President Truman, successor to Franklin D. Roosevelt, who did not live to see the end of the war, made the electrifying announcement to a people that hoped at long last this would be the war to end all wars. The White House press corps, here in full strength, made a dash for telephones to report the top news story in 5 years. And wherever it was read or heard, uncontrolled jubilation broke out. New York's Times Square was typical of streets and squares in cities and villages throughout the allied world. Celebrations continued through the night. And into the next day, leaving debris scattered ankle deep that no one seemed to mind. Also in 1945, 50 nations gathered in San Francisco with one purpose: to stop war forever. The United Nations was born. First to sign the charter, the Republic of China had been the first to know aggression. Andrei Gromyko represented the Soviet Union. Mackenzie King for Canada. Saudi Arabia. For the United States, Secretary of State Edward Stettinius.
America's Senator Arthur Vandenberg, architect of our bipartisan foreign policy. A hero came home to begin a new life, General Eisenhower. Home to his family, Citizen Eisenhower. At Columbia, University President Eisenhower. When war clouds gathered once more, back into uniform for NATO. Finally, heeding the call of his country, Dwight Eisenhower was to be President of the United States.
Meanwhile, the fast-flying world presented new wonders to its inhabitants. 1947 was the year of the first commercial round-the-world flight. Later, DC-7Cs flying the Polar Circle route, and non-stop to almost anywhere. It was a long way from the Spirit of St. Louis to the Stratoclipper, yet we stood only on the threshold of air travel. Dawn of the Jet Age. Many of these planes will soon be flying. New York to London, 6 hours, 15 minutes. New York to Paris, 6.5 hours. No two places on the globe more than 24 hours apart. Each of these superjets, an ocean liner of the sky, carrying as many people across the seas in a year as any huge ship that plies the water. And not just one or two, but an entire fleet of 45 Pan American jets will spearhead a new era of flight. 30 years that changed the world, a revolution in our time, creating a world capable of mass movement, where no man need be a stranger to another. Passengers are peace, and peace passengers. Of leadership in international day. The sky is yours, crisscrossed by invisible bridges to everywhere. Bridges built during 30 years that changed the world.